When the F4U Corsair first screamed across the skies of the Pacific, American pilots gave it a chilling name, Whistling Death. With those strange bent wings, blistering speed, and raw firepower, it quickly became a symbol of American air power. But what most people don't realize is how it looked from the other side. To Japan, this blue-winged monster wasn't just another fighter. At first, their analysts mocked it. They saw an awkward design, a clumsy brute unfit for the elegant duels of the Zero. Yet as the war dragged on, those early dismissals turned into something far darker. Field reports filled with fear, disbelief, and reluctant respect. The story of the Corsair isn't simply about a machine. It's about how one fighter shattered an empire's confidence in the skies and exposed the fatal cracks in a doctrine built on honor, agility, and tradition. In 1943, the Corsair made its combat debut over the Pacific. And right from the start, its looks turned heads for all the wrong reasons. That massive nose jutted out like a battering ram. The cockpit, nicknamed the birdcage, was cramped and crisscrossed with metal frames that seemed to blind the pilot inside. And then, there were the wings, bent downward, then sharply back up, like some strange seabird caught in mid-dive. To many, it looked less like a fighter and more like a mistake. Japanese analysts scoffed. In their eyes, it was clumsy, brutish, incapable of matching the elegant maneuvers of the Zero. They dismissed it as a rushed American design, built to intimidate, not to win. Even among American crews, doubts ran deep. Navy pilots cursed its tricky handling. Landing it on a carrier deck often ended in disaster, with planes bouncing, swerving, or plunging nose first into the sea. At first glance, it seemed the Corsair had little chance to change the balance of power. To the Japanese, it was an oddity. To the U.S. Navy, a headache. Few suspected that behind that awkward frame lay a machine that would soon redefine aerial combat and shatter the very confidence of Japan's best pilots. But first impressions didn't last. Once the Corsair unleashed its full potential, those early doubts began to collapse. At the heart of this strange-looking fighter roared the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, an engine that pumped out a staggering 2,000 horsepower. That kind of raw power made the Corsair the fastest carrier-based fighter in the American arsenal, capable of more than 440 miles per hour in level flight, and dive speeds that could push past 500. And it wasn't just speed. 6 heavy .50 caliber machine guns bristled from its wings, each one spitting out streams of lead with devastating accuracy. Japanese pilots who once toyed with Wildcats and Hellcats suddenly found themselves on the defensive. The Corsair didn't dance in graceful circles. It came screaming down from above, guns blazing, then rocketed back into the sky before anyone could react. The first Japanese reports tell the story. Field notes from Rabaul described a blue demon that moved faster than expected and struck with terrifying precision. Veteran Zero pilots, men who once hunted the skies with ease, were shocked to discover they had met an opponent they couldn't outclimb, outdive, or outrun. The Corsair was no longer the clumsy oddity that analysts dismissed. It was a monster, and it had just announced its arrival on the Pacific stage. Yet for all its power, the Corsair carried one flaw that nearly doomed it in the eyes of the Navy. That long nose, stretching out like a spear, blocked forward visibility on final approach. Its stiff landing gear caused the plane to bounce hard on impact, sometimes skipping across the deck or plunging straight into the sea. To American deck crews, it was a nightmare. To Japanese observers, it was a weakness worth smiling at. Naval intelligence in Tokyo quickly reached a conclusion. This new blue fighter was too dangerous for carrier duty. It would remain tied to land bases, its reach limited, its threat containable. On paper, it looked like a comforting truth. But in the brutal mud and heat of the Pacific Islands, the U.S. Marine Corps was already proving them wrong. From hastily carved strips on Bougainville and Peleliu, Corsair squadrons roared into action. They strafed Japanese airfields, shredded supply lines, and established control where none had existed before. What Japan thought was a limitation became a weapon. By late 1944, the U.S. Navy had solved the Corsair's landing troubles. Now carrier decks launched this beast straight into enemy skies. For Japanese pilots, it was a chilling revelation. As one captured report admitted, "We believed the blue fighter could not land on ships. Now it comes from the sea. There is no escape." For Japanese engineers, the deeper they studied the Corsair, the more unsettling the picture became. Those odd bent wings, once mocked as clumsy, were not cosmetic at all. They were a clever solution, allowing the Corsair to mount the largest propeller ever fitted to a Navy fighter, 13 feet of spinning steel, driven by a supercharged engine that poured raw power into every climb and dive. The airframe itself was no fragile shell. It was rugged, built to take punishment. In combat dives, it held together at speeds where lighter aircraft would tear themselves apart. When Japanese pilots tried to follow the Corsair into a vertical dive, their own wings shuddered and failed long before the American fighter reached its limits. Then came the protection. Behind that long nose and heavy frame lay features the Zero never carried: bulletproof glass, armor plating, and self-sealing fuel tanks that shrugged off hits, which would have sent a Japanese fighter up in flames. Compared side by side, the Zero was still graceful, still nimble, but dangerously exposed. What the Japanese once hailed as elegance was, in practice, fragility. Corsair pilots could take hits, keep fighting, and return home. In the end, even Japanese analysts admitted the bitter truth. The Corsair was not elegant. It was effective and deadly. The true test came in combat, and it was here that the Corsair cemented its fearsome reputation. In the skies over the Solomon Islands, American squadrons unleashed the fighter with devastating results. Japanese formations of Zeros and Oscars, once confident of their superiority, were torn apart with ruthless efficiency. The Americans had learned their lesson. They no longer tried to outturn the nimble Zero in drawn-out duels. Instead, Corsair pilots struck from above, diving fast, firing in lethal bursts, and climbing away before the enemy could respond. It was a style of fighting that the lighter Japanese aircraft simply could not match. What once had been an arena for honor-bound dogfights had turned into a battlefield of speed, power, and shock. Even Japan's best aces were shaken. Hiroshi Nishizawa, one of the most skilled Zero pilots of the war, summed it up bitterly: "The Corsair does not fight, it kills." That one line captured the transformation. The age of elegant duels was over. By the time of Okinawa, the Corsair's dominance was undeniable. Waves of kamikaze pilots, trained to terrify Allied sailors with suicidal attacks, were cut down before reaching their targets. Corsair squadrons intercepted them relentlessly, saving thousands of American lives. For Japan, it was a nightmare realized. For America, the Corsair had become a guardian in the sky, decisive, merciless, and unstoppable. But the Corsair's most terrifying weapon wasn't just its speed or its guns, it was its voice. As air rushed over the intakes, the fighter produced a piercing whistle, an eerie, almost unnatural sound that echoed across the Pacific skies. American Marines called it whistling death, and soon the very pilots it hunted began using the same name. Reports from the front lines told a chilling story. Kamikaze units, once feared for their fanatical resolve, began to falter. Success rates dropped sharply whenever Corsairs patrolled overhead. Missions were delayed. Pilots hesitated on the runway. Some even broke formation mid-flight, veering off course simply to avoid contact with the blue-winged demon. On the ground, the terror was no less real. Japanese soldiers garrisoned on island outposts described the Corsair as a green demon that descended without warning. Its screaming dives, laced with machine gun fire and rockets, tore through bunkers and columns before defenders could react. For many, the sound of its approach alone was enough to trigger retreat into caves and tunnels. And yet, for American troops below, that same whistle meant salvation. Marines pinned down in jungles or on beaches looked up to see Corsairs diving in their defense. To them, the fighter was no demon at all. It was a guardian angel, cutting a path through fire and fear. By 1945, the Corsair's shadow stretched across every corner of the Pacific War. The proud myth of the Zero, once hailed as untouchable, was shattered. The elegant duels of samurai-inspired air combat had given way to a new philosophy, one forged in steel, firepower, and sheer survival. The Japanese way of the sky, built on agility and honor, simply could not withstand the onslaught of speed and power. Captured reports revealed a sobering admission. "This is not an aircraft to match," one Japanese officer wrote. "It is an aircraft to avoid." That sentence marked the end of an era. The Empire's finest aces were gone, ground down in relentless battles, replaced by green recruits with little training and no hope of turning the tide. The Corsair's legacy was not just measured in victories or kill counts. It lived in the doubt it planted in enemy hearts, in the fear that spread whenever its whistle was heard, in the grudging respect carved into post-war memoirs of once proud pilots. To them, the Corsair was not beautiful. It was not noble, but it was unstoppable. In the end, this machine became more than a fighter plane. It was a turning point, a symbol of how innovation and pragmatism had replaced tradition and sacrifice. The Corsair didn't just win battles, it rewrote the very rules of air warfare in the Pacific. The Corsair was never built to be beautiful. It wasn't made to honor tradition or play by the old rules of combat. It was built to be effective, and in that cold, uncompromising efficiency, it rewrote the rules of the Pacific skies. But what about you? What do you think of the F4U Corsair and the way it changed the balance of the air war? Have you ever seen one in person or heard that haunting whistle for yourself? Share your thoughts and memories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey back into history, don't forget to hit like to support the channel, and make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next story of the machines that shaped our past.